listening to the History of Aviation podcast with Derrick Beeler, David Rowe, and David Gorman.
This episode of the History of Aviation podcast is brought to you by True Comfort Heat and Air. Veteran-owned and operated True Comfort Heat and Air. More information in the description below. Well, hello friends, and welcome to the History of Aviation podcast, episode number 56. I'm Derrick Beeler, and first off, I'm joined by Mr. David Rowe. What's going on, David?
Oh, it's been an exciting week for me. I have just returned from Hickory, North Carolina, where I witnessed the retirement of an Aviate Harrier to the Hickory Aviation Museum. It was very nice. They flew in two, actually. They two-seat trainer and the aircraft that's being retired. They did a couple of passes, the carrier break, touch and goes, had a water cannon salute, and it was a great day of aviation. There was like 4,000 people that showed up to see it be retired to the museum. And then the next day, I stuck around and watched the trainer take off and go back to Cherry Point, and then went to Charlotte's airport to the new Overlook and watched some aircraft over there. So I've had a busy couple of days of aviation in my world. So it's been fun. So glad to be here.
Definitely sounds like it. And our own Dave Gorman is on vacation this week. I know he's visiting over at Kitty Hawk for a little bit. I seen on Facebook. So that's a lot of fun. So we have a special guest host, Mr. Julien Martinson. How's it going, Julien?
Oh, it's going well. Thank you so much for having me on the second time as a guest or co-host on your podcast. This week, I was really inspired by something I saw on Facebook, which was advertising from an aviation commercial about always doing our best. And aviation obviously has evolved very much, but something that still rings true is that we always strive to do our very best in whatever we do. And so I just wanted to encourage everybody with that little side note that inspired me today. As you know, I recently launched my own book, The Ultimate Guide to Careers in Aviation. And so I'm a new author that recently launched my own book. But today, it's truly a distinguished pleasure for me to introduce Cindy Weigand, who also wrote the book, The Big Jack and Cowboy Aviator. And she was talking about some very fascinating stories about the history of aviation. And it's truly an honor and a distinguished honor for me to introduce this inspirational author who's just also launched her first book. Cindy, can you tell me a little bit about the book and how you were inspired to bring this together and what led you to inspire the world of aviation and bring these stories to life?
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for having me with you. I told Derrick I just love to talk about this. So, when my mother died in '92, and she had mentioned that I had a great uncle who was a pilot. Well, you know, as a kid, you don't really pay much attention to those things. But I was helping Dad go through her things, and I found, I have a poster up here of an intermeet that Jack managed. I found 2 scrapbooks full of articles about Jack Ashcraft, who had flown here and there and done all this stuff. And so I said, my goodness, this is so interesting. And then I just kept reading because I thought this was really cool that I had a relative who did this. And I was telling the guys, I got a little sidelined because he attempted an endurance flight with a woman. So I started reading about women pilots because I'd only really heard of Amelia Earhart, honestly, growing up. And then, I read about them and actually did some oral histories for TWU. And so that was really neat. But I said, I got to get back to Jack. I owe him that. So I started just reading them more closely. The articles were not in any type of order. Some of them didn't even have the front page. I didn't even know when they were written. But I had a book called by Bill Rohde. It's a baling wire, chewing gum, and something. Can't even think of it now. baling wire, chewing gum, and guts. And so I read that, so it kind of gave me a chronology. There were a few inaccuracies, but anyway, I got a chronology and I put all that together. There was another book on Clyde Pangborn, so I read his accounts, and slowly I put together this chronology. And another book I read is he attempted an endurance flight, like I said, with a woman named Viola Gentry. And it was a terrible crash, and I just assumed she had died in the crash, but she didn't. She survived, and she did some work for the Harry Ransom Center in UT, Texas, and she wrote a book titled Hangar Flying. So that was another resource, and she had an account of their accident. So so it all came together, and I've since found some more. But most of them just kind of confirm or repeat what I have. So I had this chronology, and the first book I put together, version I put together was my journey interspersed with his journey. That really didn't work. I tried first person. That didn't work at all. But I used those scenes that I had developed in third person, and I came up with the story. And I approached it a little bit differently. A lot of books and articles you read about the barnstormers, and they rebel rousing and da-da-da-da-da-da. And I felt like there was enough of that. I mean, this was a real guy. He was my relative, so I approached it that way. I gave him a life. I looked at it as a mother, a sister, an aunt, and involved his family. And he has a love interest, because I wanted to know a little bit softer side. He was a tough guy. You can't do what he did, not be. But I think guys need a relief from that too sometimes, and somebody who can express things too. So it just started coming together, and I started, adding a little more here or there. I'd learned something and put it in, and came up with a story that eventually I printed.
So can you tell us a little bit about how you develop that personality in your book, and what the background is, and what would you like your audience to resolve or pull out of that character development?
That's an interesting question. I had a letter he had written of an account of flying through fog. And so that took a little bit of, he can spin a yarn. But there were quotes of him in these articles, and some of them were quite lengthy accounts and telling about him. And so I got a sense of the kind of person he was. And I think certainly he could rebel rouse, and I think he probably drank too much. But they all did. He was in World War I, so but when you're flying, you can't drink. So, so I kind of had a sense of the character type he was. So I just ran from there and created my own uncle. Who's going to dispute me, right?
Well, did you ever get a chance? Does anybody in the family have any stories that you could recall, or that they could recall that you could use? Was there any family history that had come up through all your research?
Well, I did. When I found the newspaper articles, I found some family histories, and those are very helpful. And I was going through some flash drives. I've been at this 20 years, so I found some flash drives, and I found a couple of things that I'd forgotten I had, so I did have that to go on. But, a lot of how it happened, I had to just create that myself, in the storytelling. So, but a lot of it is just, the quotes, and what I read about his quotes, have him quoted in the articles and things like that. That was fun.
So how long was he in the Gates Flying Circus? How many years did he participate?
He was in the Gates Flying Circus for 2 years. He joined late 24, as far as I can figure. Flew with them 25 and 26, and then he left in 27. and it went out on his own. And he managed some air meets. One of them was Endicott. One was at Elmira, where he flew in the same air meet as Jimmy Doolittle. So I think when you fly in the same air meet with Jimmy Doolittle, you're pretty darn good.
I would think so, yes.
You know? And it's an incredible account of what Doolittle did. I was just going, wow, you know. So that's all been very fun to me to have heard about people in history, to have kind of a first-hand account on how my uncle encountered them, you know, or at least their flight paths crossed or something like that. So that was all fun to me.
Do you know of any of the aircraft that he actually flew? I mean, I assume like a Curtiss Jenny or something along those lines?
I would believe he learned to fly in the Jenny. I think so many did. I can't find any documentation that he flew a de Havilland or Thomas Moore Scout, but I do know that Gates had the J1 Standard fitted so that they could carry passengers, and they carried 4 passengers after the air show.
I actually read a quote that said they had metal stairs attached to that aircraft so that as people were getting out of the airplane, the other side they were putting them in. So it was a real business endeavor. They were out there to make some money.
It was, and they had their own spiel, you know. We fly high, we fly low, I can't remember just how it goes. But they did that, and they had people in a holding pen. They had people that ushered them through. They had barkers. They had ticket. I mean, it was a circus. It was a flying circus. They had buildings or instrument. They had, I think there were like 6 planes up here, but they had, of course, a tanker, fuel car, fuel truck, and they had a concession stand, so they didn't have to go in to get food. And of course, they could sell food. And they also had a vehicle for a big tent to put up to repair. I mean, it was a circus, and I have even seen a photograph that has the Barker standing on the front of a wagon that says "Gates Flying Circus, World's Greatest Exhibition Aviators," and that was fun. I didn't use it; it was a little bit cumbersome to get use of it, so I hated not to, but it just. You know, you're on a budget, and I self-published it, so I didn't use it, but I know it's out there.
What were some of the challenges that you faced in collecting the data to write the book? And were you disappointed or overjoyed at any point in writing the book, or did you have at any time did you get writer's block?
You know, I was fortunate in writing this story is I really had it laid out for me. It had character arcs, it had story arcs. And so I just tried to play on that. It was challenging because people were coming in and out of the circus all the time. And who do I focus on? And the more I read and everything, you know, names kept being repeated. And I kept seeing them in the articles, so I finally just settled on a few, but I mentioned a lot of them. One of those is Wilmer Stoltz. Do you know who Wilmer Stoltz is? No.
Negative.
That's right. He flew Amelia Earhart across the Atlantic.
Okay.
He and another Gordon somebody, I can't remember the name right now. And so he, you know, it was just interesting to see these intersections, like I said, of the people and the pilots and the people I'd heard of in history, and they tell of meeting Hap Arnold, which I just think was epic to think that my great uncle might have met him. And in fact, he did in the book, but it's a little bit conjecture on my part, but not far-fetched, really. He crossed paths with Lindbergh. He was in a 1927 cross-country race, and he met Ruth Elder, who was a pilot with George Haldeman, who tried to cross the Atlantic in 1927. So, you know, the guy got around.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your favorite scenes in the book and how, as an author, you were able to develop those scenes to to develop the plot, and what stands out in your mind? What is the epic point of the book?
I guess that he's the protagonist, and people, ask who's the antagonist. Well, an antagonist doesn't have to be a person. His parents didn't want him to do this in my book. He was always facing that aspect of death. And so, those are the things I tried to develop and put a little more into his psyche and in the reader's, minds. Because he was, I've seen him described more than once as kind of a hard luck. They're just those people who have hard luck, and he was one of them. So, but in the between, he did these amazing things. He, I don't want to give a big spoiler alert, but this is pretty epic. And I do have an article, and I use articles in the book. That they simulated an attack on New York City in 1925. And how prescient was that? This is when Billy Mitchell was being court-martialed. And they wanted to prove his theory correct, according to Pangborn and Carl Cleveland. So, and that's believable to me. From what I've read. I haven't read any bios of Billy Mitchell, but I have read some about him. And the period, his court-martial and why and everything. So it's feasible.
So the book talks a lot about the role of a pilot, and you mentioned that they were like daredevils and had a lot of courage to fly, and we talk about that they were courageous to overcome the challenges. Yet in today's world, safety has evolved a lot. So what was the takeaway for young people coming into the industry, and what could they learn from the book and apply to today's life? Can you shed some light on that?
Oh, I haven't been asked that before. I guess they need to realize the courage it did take for these guys. These airplanes were just kites with a motor, as far as I can describe them. They were wooden. They were covered with linen fabric. They did have dope on them, but they didn't have, it was hardened, but you still had to, if you're going to wing walk or get on, you still had to get on the wooden parts. And I guess I would say an appreciation for what these guys do. I kind of compare them to the early astronauts, because it was really the unknown then, of what the airplane could do. You can fly, and the wing walkers were fun and exciting. But what's interesting to me, and one approach I didn't want to take is, it seems like in the small towns in the South, and the book I'm reading now confirms it, the more rural it was, the more they wanted to see an accident or a disaster. And I really didn't want to go there, because if you win 6 trophies, you're a pretty darn good flyer if you've flown with Jimmy Doolittle. So I think the approach that Gates and Pangborn wanted to take with the flying circus was more aerial exhibition. And they did have the wing walkers, and Duke Krantz was very good. You kind of had to have that to get crowds in, but they did seem to focus on the aerial part. And it's interesting when we would go south, into like Florida, they got into more and more gimmicks, and they flew in Florida to take advantage of the land rush down there, because Flagler had built this highway, and so it's just a very interesting time too, with Prohibition. The building of that highway, and women just getting the right to vote. The 20s were just a fascinating time to me. So all of that was fun for me to research, so it wasn't hard.
Tell me a little bit about how Jack learned to fly. I read that he was in World War I in the Motor Transport Division. So how did he become a pilot? Do you know who taught him to fly?
I don't know. There was a history of him. He set up, when he went out on his own, he set up headquarters in Towanda, Pennsylvania, and they put out publication and wrote articles about him. And in that, he said he was stationed, it shows his sequence of joining the Army. He was at Kelly Field, San Antonio, and then he eventually went over to England and then to France. And he was stationed at Romanturin. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right. And that was the largest airfield in Europe. It was like 2 miles long or something like that, just incredibly big. So I think he probably repaired airplane motors as well as other motors. I have pictures of him on a motorcycle. So I've heard pilots say, I wouldn't fly a plane that a mechanic wouldn't fly in with me.
Absolutely.
My mechanic wouldn't fly with me. So I think that's probably how he learned to fly.
If he says, hey, you go ahead, I don't think I'd go there.
No, I wouldn't. I mean, that was completely believable to me. So I don't know much about his World War I. I think the records were destroyed in the fire. But I did find this book. It's France on Fragile Wings. And I haven't read it yet, but reading about it, the author's father follows the same path that Jack did. So I'm hoping it will, enlighten me as to what it could have been. But I just can't find anything on him in World War I. So that's why I started the Facebook page. I'm hoping, people
yeah.
Yeah, and also I kind of found Duke Krantz's son by chance. So I thought, well, sure, there are other people out there that probably survived. They didn't, And so I'm hoping descendants of some of these pilots will contact me. And so I could start, putting together a little more accurate.
Yeah. Flesh it out. You're just trying to flesh out the stories.
Right, and I'm just curious, I want to know.
We all are now, for sure. And before we went on air, you were showing us some pictures. So sometimes what I do is I'll make some videos for our YouTube channel, just a little sample of the podcast. So you were showing us some photos. Can you show those photos again and tell us about them?
Okay, this is a photo. It hung on the family wall in Protection, Kansas. You see the guy in the headband?
Yes.
The one to the right with his tie blown back, that's Jack. Next to him is a wing walker with a headband, that's Duke Krantz, Aaron Krantz. And that was on there. A companion photo. I haven't taken this one down, and I can send you the actual image,
sure.
Send image. And this is all the vehicles. And they're also in my book. I include quite a few pictures in my book.
Okay.
But there's one photo, if you go to the Facebook page, Big Jack, and he's Big Jack Cowboy Aviator because that's how the newspapers referred to him.
Okay.
And so if you go to the Facebook page, Big Jack and the Gates Flying Circus, there's an image. And I don't know if I can find it in here right quick. But they're like 8 or 9 guys. There are like 4 in the background, right next to the plane, and there are 4 or 5 kneeling. And the guys in the background, it's Jack and I believe Bill Brooks. They called him Whispering Bill because he's hard of hearing. And then that distracts me. Everybody had a nickname. And then it was Ive McKinney and I think George Dawes, who was one of the front men. Anyway, these guys have their arms around the shoulders of the guys next to them. And that's just camaraderie to me. And I just think it's the most epic photo. And, but if you want me to send some of these to you, rather than just holding them up, I'll be glad to do that.
Sure, absolutely. We'll post them on our Facebook, on our social media.
Because they do tell a story. They really do. Pictures paints 1,000 words. It really does.
It absolutely does.
Another quick question for you. So your stories are very fascinating, and I think that the methodology that you've used to collect them and put everything together and the thoughtfulness is just really fascinating. But do you have plans for a second book or other projects coming up?
You know, I mentioned that I fabricated a love interest. And she's actually inspired by a pilot on Long Island who had a newspaper. And I've become a little bit intrigued with their story. And so I have started their story, and it will be complete, fiction. But I can incorporate a few more women and more of the interaction with some of the women amongst themselves and how he interacted with them, how they knew each other. They had to have all known each other. And then reading the family histories, there were stories of him growing up. And I thought about, some children's books or even little graphic novels, because you have to see a biplane to know what it looks like, it's just, how can you describe that?
Well, they all look unique too. There's something, really great about seeing an actual biplane, because they were all so different at that time.
Yeah, I have taken 2 rides, one in a new standard in New York at Rhinebeck, and the other one in Austin, and it was in Waco, I believe, or Stearman. I can't remember. I'll have to look at. But noisy, windy. Oh my gosh! And I was just loving every minute of it to keep me in the. I know, but to think of them flying and people wing walking and staying on the wings, and it just, of course, the Jenny didn't go that fast, but still, I mean, you're up there. I don't know. It's just, and women did stunts too. It wasn't just the men.
Oh yeah.
So on that note, I don't know if you're aware, but 94% of pilots are male, and only 6% are female. And slowly, the industry is progressing to incorporate more females into the aviation industry. And so in the earlier discussions, you mentioned about female role models, female pilots, female stunt pilots, and how their leadership and their dedication to the aviation and their pursuit for excellence and their love and passion for the skies really drove them to become leaders and role models for today. So can you develop a little bit about how the female characters in the book, or that you touched on, and how it would inspire young females or young girls to also pursue careers in aviation? Can you shed some light on that?
I think it's just by knowing about them. Growing up, I did not know about them. And so just if I had seen more growing up and knew about them in history besides Amelia Earhart, maybe I would have been a pilot. But, they did air marking for the United States before the war. Then they had to undo it because of World War II. They did stunt work. They were racers. And if we had just read about them, and the same with African Americans, if we had just read about them in history while history was happening more, I think that would help a lot. I had an interesting experience this summer. It was really a lot of fun. I don't know if you know about the 99s. They're
Yes.
Organization of Women Pilots, and it started actually, the pilot that Jack flew with for the endurance flight was a founding member. And they had the Power Puff Derby in 1929. Not long, and so continuing that tradition is the Air Race Classic. And this year they travel like 2,500 miles. And this year there was a stopover in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, which is just north of Tulsa. And I said, "Oh goody, I'm going to volunteer." So I did that, and I think there were something like 65 teams, 2 and 3 member teams. So that's a lot of young women, and it was just awesome to see these women get out in their cute skirts, and I could say that, cute skirts and their shirts and their aviators, and and they had just flown, and they were just going to turn it back around and get back in up and continue the flight, and it was just fun to see. And so I think, if more people knew about that race and more people knew about the 99s, but there are some Facebook pages I'm a member of, like Women in Aviation History, and I try to share those when I can. And part of the Facebook page I want to use for aviation history. I've been reading some that you guys put on. Put some of those on there. I have a newsletter that I put out. I'll start probably telling them more about Jack himself and on those that I know, and what else was happening at the time. So I have a lot of opportunity to help educate people, but I think it's just education. It's not going to appeal to that many, and I had no idea what the ratios were. But more and more you're hearing of pilots, and I asked a pair, what are you going to do and they had a college section too, and I thought that was a great thing to do, is have colleges have teams. And they said, well, we're going to do this, get some more experience, and then we'll approach the airlines. And I said, cool. So.
Well, the airlines are always looking for more pilots, so, there's opportunity there. If you're interested, then definitely go for it.
Really? I mean, if you have the acumen for it, go for it.
Yeah, it takes a certain kind of personality to get into aviation and becoming a pilot. Mm-hmm. It's a skill that's STEM based, so you have to love math and engineering, and the development for this career is also quite expensive, very challenging. So you need the financial support, mm-hmm. as well as support from your family. And it's ideal that if you want to pursue a career in as a pilot, that you start young, as early as your teenage years. And on that note, thank you so much for sharing with us.
Mm-hmm. And take the girls to the Air and Space Museums. I go there and I see them, and the girls are in the cockpit, fake cockpits and in the space capsules. And just take your daughters to these places and take them to Oshkosh, which I have not been. If you guys can get me in there, I would appreciate it.
They won't even let us in. So, real quick, you were asking before we went on air about some World War I aircraft. David Rowe, can you throw some World War I aircraft at us?
Well, let's start with like the Sopwith Camel, the Fokker D7, the Red Baron's triplane, the Albatross. There's quite a few, biplanes out there. Everybody, the Newport, the French Newport.
We did that one a while back, yeah.
Yes, we did that one a while back. We did the Albatross a while back. So both of those are very famous, very good aircraft. The Eindecker, there's a bunch.
Thomas Moore Scout and de Havilland. Now, one thing I did not realize until I did this research, and I read a book about a cross-country flight in 1919. I can't remember the name of the author, but it was, anyway, it's about the air race. And, they flew all these old planes that just fell apart as they were flying. And the United States, they had a trainer, but they did not have a fighter plane in World War I. Am I correct?
That is correct. We were using British and French aircraft because we didn't have an industry that built aircraft that way yet.
Yeah. And I did not know that before. I did not realize that. I'd heard of the names of some of these aircraft, but I didn't know, so that was something new for me. So I want to ask, but do you know of the Quiet Birdman?
I don't believe I do.
It's a secretive organization, and it was started by, I don't know who started it, but it's very secretive. I can't find any information about it. And but Jack was a member. It's very exclusive. So look it up, Quiet Birdman. You can find a little bit about what it is.
Right.
He was that, and there was another thing I was going to tell you. I don't want to give you very many spoiler alerts, but if you're a World War II buff, Jack was the originator of the short snorter tradition.
I was about to ask you that exact question. I found several things about he was the originator of the short snorters, and it's like, how in the world did that happen?
Oh, you probably found the one. I have one on by Lowell Thomas. I can send it to you. And I had through a library I had spoken to, I had a nemesis contact me, and he was just looking for this article with definitive proof that Jack started this. I said, this is oral tradition. This is prohibition. No reporter's going to write about this if they want to keep their job, you know?
Right, yeah.
It's just like, think about this guy, what you're saying. And finally, he conceded that I was right, that, no, it's an oral tradition, but Lowell Thomas and Carl Cleveland knew him, and I think Clyde Pangborn. But I read about it in the article that I have in the family, and it's also in the book about Clyde Pangborn. And there's also a documentary about Clyde Pangborn that has that picture that I mentioned, the world's greatest exhibition aviators. So,
okay, awesome.
Yeah.
I look forward to reading it.
Absolutely great, Cindy, and we appreciate you joining us on the History of Aviation podcast today.
Oh, I've loved it. I just thank you so much.
And go ahead, Dave.
Well, I was just going to say, there's just all this aviation history that's out there in the world that, you know, you start digging and things just appear. And you're a prime example of this. You know, we didn't know anything about Jack. And now it's like, well, I've got pages here of printouts where I've been pulling up information, trying to learn more about him. So, look forward to reading the book and getting, you know, what you've got.
Yeah. Well, I thank you. And find out something I haven't put in the book, let me know, because I'm always looking out for more information, hearing from, like I said, from some of the descendants of some of the aviators. And sadly, like Ivan Gates, he committed suicide. Pangborn he's an interesting case. You need to watch that documentary on him. It's pretty interesting.
Definitely.
It's a PBS publication from Seattle, I think, and it's on YouTube. So. You know, it's just fascinating to me. And who knows, how can you say why something fascinates you? It just gets your fancy or it doesn't. It's hard to say.
It absolutely doesn't. And real quick, Cindy, can you tell folks where can we get the book? Where can we find you on social media and get all that information? Okay,
you can find the book. You can order it from Amazon, Kindle, and ebook.
We'll also put a link down below for that.
Yeah. You can order it through a bookstore, but Amazon probably be faster. Mm-hmm. It's on the library system if you want to go that way. So it's just about any way you can get a book, it's there. Self-publishing these days makes it really easy. The hardest part was formatting it and getting the pictures just right. That was a little cumbersome, but I just wanted to include them. And like I said, I included a lot of the articles. And somebody asked me, why did you put so many in? And I have taken some out that were redundant. But first of all, they were important to him. He saved them. And they helped tell his story. You know, the writing of the day was very colorful. And it was just real time. You know, it just didn't make sense for me to try to tell his story without including that. And they are almost another character, if that makes sense. And so,
absolutely.
Anyway, so any way you wanted to get a book, you can. I appreciate it. And the page, I have an author page, but the page for Jack is Big Jack and the Gates Flying Circus. And I encourage people to go there and leave any information they have about him or anybody that flew in that era or anything like that. That's why I started the page, is so. And you can post. I will be watching it carefully, but I think people will be respectful of it. And you know, so if they're not, I'll just say go away.
Absolutely, for sure. We appreciate it, Cindy. And the History of Aviation podcast you can find. So we have a Facebook group, first off, where you can join the Facebook group. Cindy just joined recently. And we also have a Facebook page. We have Instagram and Twitter, and we have a new segment coming out daily on YouTube called This Day in Aviation History, where we take a look back. I host that when we take a look back on this particular day in aviation history. We try to keep the videos less than 2 minutes, so that's good. You can also find our website. Everything for the History of Aviation podcast is listed below. Thank y'all.
Mm-hmm. And through my website, cindyweigand.com, you can sign up for my newsletter if you're interested.
Perfect.
So.
And David Rowe over at Aerophile. And Julien, what do you got going on? You got the book. We got the book out we talked about recently.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So we got the Ultimate Guide to Careers in Aviation, and I'm still in the process of launching it. And I'm next week I'll actually be traveling on Air Canada to Australia to participate in my master's graduation ceremony in aviation management. So it's kind of the new era of aviation, where you can study aviation business policy and international aviation laws, even at the master's level. So for those people that are considering a career in aviation, but they're scared of heights, you can get into aviation, but get into a business, get a desk job too, and be really good at it. So those are all the opportunities that are available.
And David Rowe, I'm sure you got much more to update on aerophile.com.
As a matter of fact, I will have video of the Harrier's retirement ceremony on Friday evening at 5 o'clock on my Aerophile YouTube channel. So about 28 minutes of Harrier fun. So come check it out.
You can't beat it. You can really get lost in that Aerophile for sure. Well, I appreciate it, Cindy, Julien, and David. For David Rowe, Dave Gorman, and Julien Martinson, I'm Derrick Beeler. Thanks for listening to the History of Aviation podcast.
This is Joe Morse. You are listening to the History of Aviation podcast with Derrick Beeler, David Rowe, and David Gorman.